Hi, everybody. I can see you all joining now. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to allow everybody to get online, and then I will do an introduction. Thank you for joining us. I can see more people are joining. Just give it a few more minutes. Okay, so I think it's a couple of minutes past one now, so start the session. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rebecca Clay. I'm the Tourism and Destination Marketing Manager, and I've been leading on this Gloucester Place branding project. I want to thank you all for coming to today's session. The aim of today's session is to give you all an understanding and the confidence and skills to start using our place branding. And this includes weaving the Gloucester story narrative into your own content and also getting an idea of how you can start using the visual language as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John Till from Thinking Place, who's going to start the session.
Thank you very much. Okay, so great to be with you all. As Rebecca said, my name is John Till. I'm the founder of Thinking Place. We've had the great pleasure of working with you guys over the last year, and what a fabulous and fascinating place you have. And what I'm going to do in this part of the session is go back to the place story that we created. So this is this forward-looking view of what Gloucester can be, what it needs to focus on. And the reason it's so important is that everything visually, as Peter will talk about, is completely driven by that strategic story and view of place. And that story has come from a huge amount of research, immersion in the place, but most importantly, it's come from listening to the stakeholders of Gloucester and the wider area. So I'm not going to show you all of the presentation that relates to that, but I am going to focus on some key bits that came from it. And the first bit, I guess, is to look at, from the whole gamut of evidence, what we took out of it as being important for the place based on what we heard. I think the first thing is that people felt that the place didn't have an identity. It kind of lost that along the way. But you are a place that's absolutely dripping with assets and potential. Yet despite all of that, you are quite hard on yourselves. There's quite a bit of running the place down, where from our perspective, and we of course work with a lot of places, you've got some amazing stuff going on and some amazing assets. And part of that, of course, is your young people, your diversity, how that plays into the whole cultural opportunity that the place has, which is fantastic. If you are going to progress, and we will be saying it with most places, it's very important that there is collaboration, and there needs to be more collaboration across the place than that there is now. One of the things that's very interesting is that people, and we've put here, kind of retreat to the history of the place. And they do that because, yeah, obviously they're proud of it, and that's fine. But a large part of it is because they don't know what the future holds, and they find it hard to talk about that. And a bit of that is a lack of confidence. So because we're not confident in our identity and where we're going, we'll just go back to what we do know. And with that industrial legacy, there is a little bit, again, of being a little bit ashamed of it. I haven't got a clue why. It is cool. It's amazing. It's interesting. And when you look at your you've got to look at the wider place. That's what we do all the time. We're not going to just narrowly look at the city centre. Up the road, you have Cheltenham, which is a completely complementary offer to what you do. Cheltenham is not Gloucester, and you're not trying to be Cheltenham, and that's a good thing. So you can use Cheltenham, it's part of the story, just as is the Cotswolds are. I mean, the Cotswolds are probably one of the strongest place brands in the UK. You'd be mad not to make use of that as effectively your countryside. So as we went through all this, it was really clear that Gloucester is really the centre of a much wider experience and has the chance to develop much more as a destination, a value hub. You know, if you're going to think about the Cotswolds, it's expensive to stay. It's often difficult to get accommodation. Why would you not have a city experience linked to your Cotswold experience? It would work perfectly. But all of this needs an approach of reaching out, thinking wider, and in doing all of this as well, going back to the centre, is thinking about how you use your space. We tend to focus an awful lot on physicality in buildings, but you have some amazing spaces. Some of those are water spaces, some of them are green, and some of them are urban. But they're not really used as effectively as they could be in terms of that place experience, storytelling, and animation of the place. So, yes, celebrate what your history is, but equally importantly, communicate the future. You don't want to get lost in passive nostalgia. And it's pretty critical that there is one city, even though there are different experiences. And by that, I mean, you know, the Keys area, etc., is amazing, but there's other bits of the city that are equally amazing. We need to think of it and behave with it like it is one. And some of that is about packaging, you know, and that's about a better packaged offer of the city as one, but the surrounding experiences. You have, again, what most places would love to have: water. Again, is it used as well or as much as it could be? I think we don't think so. And one of the things about making sure that you have a joined up city is around signage, navigability, and connectivity of place. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. And, you know, play up and really play on this urban, this industrial DNA, because it is different. It is surprising. You don't expect when you come off the motorway to quite see what you see in Gloucester. And that's a good thing, you know, being that little bit intriguing. And also the key bit is to behave like a city. You know, city behaviours are really key. We work with lots of places that have tried 3 and 4 times to become a city and have failed. You have that status. You need to make the most of it. And this is almost like a bit of dialogue that we heard quite a lot, you know, when listening to people. You know, we're not Cheltenham, we're not the Cotswolds, we're not really Gloucestershire, we're a bit grimy, we're a bit urban, you know, some of it is even a bit industrial, we're a bit more working class than posh. And it's all very defensive, to which we would say, isn't that absolutely brilliant? Because that's differentiation. And that's something that people are going to find attractive, particularly in the location that you are. And, you know, as I say, we work with a lot of places. Let's look at what's important. So it's fantastic if you can be a city, but big tick. We'd love to have some water, another big tick. Yeah, university is always key, another big tick. We've got some of the best countryside, the strongest place brand there is, almost, big tick. Yeah, we're very well linked up, another big tick. And we're pretty youthful, big tick. And we're diverse. There's a lot of ticks on a lot of strategically critical things for a place there. So it's very strong from an asset perspective. The two bits that we will talk about are communication needs to be better and collaboration needs to be better. And we talked about some of the behaviours, I talked about city behaviours. These are some of the things that we pulled out that we think are critical if you're going to move forward. That celebration, there's not enough of that going on. Taking risks, being actually prepared to make a mistake. There's nothing wrong with that as long as we learn a unified approach, that confidence that we need, that should be there in a youthful, outward-looking, forward-looking place. So in terms of the actual story, really what the story is it's made up of some themes, some thematic areas, and they are what we think are the key elements for you going forward to change your image, but also to drive transformation of the place. So when I show you these, they are not marketing, they are not strap lines, they are the engine within the car that drives what you see on the outside. And that outside could be everything from websites to social media to campaigns, etc. But it all comes from the story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the evidence that supports each of the themes, then we'll show you the themes. I'm not going to go through all of this because you can read it quite easily. But again, we talked about assets here. And I think, from the cathedral to the lanes, etc., the Waterway Museum, the canal, so much stuff from Roman to modern industry in terms of history. So it's fantastic, but make it relevant to today and never forget that every day you're making a new history. So I go back to the point I made before. Let's not get lost in passive nostalgia of always looking back. And when we look back, let's look back to look forward. We've been good at this, and it's informing how we're going to do this tomorrow. So we talked about that as harnessing and animating our history. And as I say, there's a lot of storytelling opportunities there, which are absolutely fantastic. The next one is thinking about things around diversity, your wonderful ethnic mix, and the huge opportunity there is around culture, but all these wonderful spaces that you've got where people can enjoy coming together. And, we talked there about a space strategy. We really think you need that to look at how you get the absolute best out of those spaces. And the bit that we were thinking about with Gloucester is its wonderful opportunity around a place to not just live, but live in this new environment that we're in now. There's the university where people go to learn and etc. So there's a lot of people looking to use the place to kind of inspire them, for their enjoyment, to develop them as people. And we talked about that as our place, your stage. Your city in its assets provides a wonderful backdrop and support for people as they look to develop themselves and develop their families and careers. And sitting above those thematic areas is a big idea. The big idea is a bit more of a strategic signature. It's a kind of a statement of intent. It's a bit more behavioural. And here we talk about some of the things that I've just touched on. What about Gloucester as the experiential city, this wonderful urban oasis set amongst the Cotswolds, Forest of Dean, etc. It can be an exemplar place to live and work. And how important is that? And then there's the aspect that's important to the place about being environmentally friendly and climate conscious. And how important is that going to be? And again, Gloucester can grab this. But in looking at all of these things, it is about daring to be different. You are different. As I said, don't apologise for it. I'll be absolutely bigging it up as much as I can. And that's because when we look at that big idea, we think about here as Gloucester experience and embrace the urban unexpected, because at the heart of your story is really the fact that it is a bit unexpected. It is a bit of a surprise when you get there, but that is a wonderful thing to have. So when you look at your story, you see a big idea and two thematic areas. They are incredibly strong, and we're looking to see those being used, not just in how you communicate, but in how you develop the place, what is developed, what facilities and services are brought forward. So that's really where we've got to in terms of the story. So I will stop sharing now, and I'll hand over to Peter, who is Creative Director for Thinking Place, and say a little bit about that and his work also with Peter Anderson Studio.
Unmute, that's the final thing that's always important to do. So my name's Peter Anderson. I'm Creative Director for Thinking Place, and I'm Director of Peter Anderson Studio. We've worked with Place for over 15 years now, actually. We've worked with countries, counties, cities, towns, villages, all the way through. With my other head on, I also work with and brand big stories in film and television. These things may seem very different, but actually they're incredibly similar. So when you think of some of the places that we've worked with, it's not just what their strategy is, it's what their strategy can do. And as John said, it's not simply about giving you a strap line, giving you a logo, giving you things like that. We're giving you an engine. That's the really important thing. And from that engine, you can create a multiple mass of communications. And in this case, with Northern Ireland, for its tourism, advertising, you know, including television adverts, radio adverts, signage systems, clever strategic exemplar books. But they're all effectively finding different ways of bringing to life the themes and the big idea. This is another example. This is Livingstone in Zambia. What was important here was thinking about not just how we create new assets, but how we use local people to do that, and how we harness the local talent, but turn that around to bring to life local stories. So this is just one example of that, which is a very ambitious sculpture park, which is made by local sculptures, where international money was bent to effectively make something quite wonderful happen in terms of both training and opportunity. But again, another theme brought to life. The city of Lancaster, and here you can see just one event, you know, in terms of the thinking of the relocation or the extension of the Eden project. And again, the assets that you're given as a place as part of this process can be used for multiple things, you know, whether they be things that change your communications, whether they be things that change your products, whether they be things that change your behavior. Another example, smaller scale, Malden. So here, this is actually about, you know, one example is showing you how the environment is changed. So the strategic thinking has brought us to a point where it's helped the place create very unique things, you know, including, as you can see on the right-hand side, their new signage, you know, which isn't the same as anybody else's because nobody else has the same story as they do. And then you think more deeply with the needs and the thoughts. And when you funnel down all that information, it's then thinking then, how does it come out the other end? What happens when you pick up on those things that are important? So with New Haven, you know, something that came across was they had to really think about utilizing their relationship with the sea and the seafront. And again, this is just one example. You know, this is something championed by the council. But an opportunity for the whole community. It's a box park with new units that are available for smaller scale businesses from the community. And again, the wonderful thing about this is with the tools that they have, which are the same as the tools you have, this is a very affordable exercise because they've got branding, they've got visual language, they've got photography, they've got a whole set of things that they can bend and use for different projects. And there's other ways of thinking about projects. So this is a kind of sub-brand from the National Trust, and this is an organization called Time Machine. And this is thinking about how you engage with your community. And not only that, but part of that process is capturing the oral history of the community. So again, the tools are all there, the opportunities there. The only thing that we're waiting for is the places imagination. So when you think of film, you think, okay, well, you know, again, these are just some of the examples we've worked with. Where does that connect? Well, that connects with attention to detail, with understanding a story and finding the right tools to help bring that story to life. And it might be as simple as just a simple bit of characterful typography. You know, you deal with different audiences. So if you're doing something for a big Hollywood company like MGM, the way you think about how that's visualized is very different from doing an art house film by Ai Weiwei. You know, and in terms of all the different stories, those different stories connect to different audiences, and those different audiences have an expectation of that story, and that story needs to be grounded visually within the evidence of what it's trying to communicate. So if you're thinking about something that's historic, it will have a look and a feel and it'll work a certain way. But if you're thinking of something modern, that behaves very differently. Therefore, you need the tools to do that. So these tools may include, like in this case with Sherlock, finding a way of using text as part of a new visual language, as part of another layer to communicate with. So when you think about telling the Gloucester story, the first thing that always comes to mind, the simplest thing to grasp, is photography, your relationship with photography. And photography is not just walk into the city centre and take a couple of shots. Photography is thinking about, again, how do we take the thing that makes us special and how do we effectively highlight it? How do we underline it? How do we draw attention to that? So, and there's different ways of doing that, because as I said before, different places have different needs because their stories are different. So using Holy Island as an example of photography of one of the places we worked with in the past, what was important to them is their connections, their Celtic roots, their topology, the land, you know, this notion that this is a spiritual land. So what that meant is, you know, when you photographed their land and some of their historical assets, you thought about communicating that spiritual aspect. And here you can see that simply is just highlighted by photographing into the sun, as opposed to traditionally the other way around. And something else that's very important to Gloucester, it's about thinking about its history, but animating it, making it relevant to today. And simply by putting people of today, families of today in your photography, you make it current to today. And those people are important, who they are and why they're there. And like I said, for Holy Island, what was very important was this feeling that the land, you know, and the land in a way was bigger than the people, had a grander part to play on its stage. So the people were smaller. The land had a bigger part to play. Effectively, the photography is simply illustrating the strategy. Coventry, on the other hand, is dealing with innovation, is dealing with technology, is dealing with enterprise and learning. What does that mean? Again, you don't just walk into the city centre, you find those things of innovation. You go to Jaguar Land Rover, you see where they're doing their research and development. You go to the university, you say, what's going on in the university? We're going to celebrate these assets. And thinking about who are in these photographs, Aldershot, for example, was initially thought about a place that was army, army, army. In terms of working with them and restructuring their position, we realized that the opportunity was very much about being family first. And what that meant is, quite simply, you're taking those assets, those army assets where the army have moved on from, and that are now that new opportunity for the place, and you're putting those families in there and you're putting them first. So you're showing its point of difference. Again, and showing off those natural assets. So with Gloucester, you know, when it comes to taking your photographs, you have to think, you know, how are we going to embrace the urban unexpected? How is that going to be illustrated? You know, there's many ways to think about that. You know, you're going to have your food assets, you're going to have your drink assets, you're going to have your experiential assets. You know, it's looking for not just the normal things, it's looking for the unexpected things. What's the university doing? What's happening on the fringes? You know, you're also thinking about, when you're thinking of commissioning your photography, how can we show examples of where we harness and animate our history? How do we do it? How do we make it relevant to our audience today? And again, we talked about our place, your stage. John mentioned earlier about the incredible spaces, and there are many incredible spaces. And it's sort of, how do we get across that these spaces are open for business, that these spaces could host an event, could be used for something quite special, and how we could use this city hub to bring in some of those visitors from the Cotswolds and other surrounding places, because we have the city asset. So one of the other tools that you have is a visual language. A visual language really is something that's a way of telling your story. It's another tool like photography. It takes the themes, the big idea, and it gives you a tool, a more illustrative tool, which is effectively connecting with this modern thinking. Lots of the things that you have aren't there yet. Some of them are aspirations. The visual language helps you jump ahead a little bit. It helps you effectively show the potential of how you could take things like history and animate it. But it also has to be flexible. So in some occasions, you might want to use it in something like a banner or a cover, or in an event like Mippin, to go, you know, this is our place and it's standing out from other places. In other cases, with some of you stakeholders, you might say, you know what, connecting with the assets of the wider place and connecting with my city might help me with recruitment, might help me stop the young people from the universities going off to another city. How do I use it? But I don't want to interfere with my own branding as an organization, but I want to say we're strongly pro the city. So in that case, it may be something as soft as a watermark that's almost invisible. So there are many uses of a visual language, and it has a very strong use in terms of involving places and organizations in a non-threatening way. A logo always threatens another logo, but a visual language is just another asset for the place and for the stakeholders within that place. So again, why would you use it? You know, we all know logos work. This is a simple example. Chesterfield, it's a small but reasonably successful market town. There's nothing wrong with it. Maybe a little bit old, maybe needs a little bit of a shake, maybe needs a little bit of a modern awakening. When you think of it, you can't really think of it without thinking of the Twisted Spire. That's its equivalent of Paris's Eiffel Tower. But that Twisted Spire, again, if you look up at Chesterfield, is used by numerous organizations because they're all very proud of that historical asset. But there are other things that are going on with Chesterfield. You know, they have an incredible inventiveness, and they have a history of inventiveness. You know, that localism has inspired many things that really should be celebrated, and the Twisted Spire is simply one of those. So an identity mark for the visual language would be saying, this is a modern awakening. We're effectively reimagining our primary asset that everybody thinks about when they think of Chesterfield. And we're celebrating that quirkiness and that quirkiness that's led to our inventiveness. But we're doing it in a modern way. But it only really goes so far. It doesn't really push the other aspects. The minute you step it forward into a visual language, you're saying we can use our ingredients of history, but those ingredients of history, really, we're using them to effectively push what happens to our future, to take history as a continuum and to move it forward. So basically, take the best bits with us, but rework with them. And a visual language helps you communicate that. It also can be used in multiple places. You know, it can be used in your assets, it can be used in schools, it can be used in bus stops. But not just that, the local stakeholders can use it. So on the right-hand side, you've got Knight Frank. They have their development, they have their own colors, they have their own design. The visual language from Chesterfield isn't interfering with that. It's not interfering with the other logos that are all competing with each other for their element of funding. It's actually bigger than that. It's the place. They belong to it. It belongs to them. So it's holding, in this case, a very supportive role. On the left-hand side, Chesterfield themselves are created a set of very simple banners that were just showing off some of their assets, their countryside assets, their architectural assets. So they took it that little bit further. They took the unique design element in the roof of the Twisted Spire and they modernized that. They took the elements that are there and kept pushing forward to make history something that we think about as something that we use today, not something that we nostalgically look back upon. So in terms of thinking about the visual language for Gloucester, you know, some of those words that John talked about, you know, in terms of the words that created the themes, you know, these are things that are incredibly important. You know, your assets are there. You're doing some of these things. You know, in some cases, you know, Gloucester Pride, History Festival, you've got some pretty big assets, you know, the National Waterway Museum, but lots of other things, you know, there's lots of other things going on, but there's opportunities. What's happening with UK City of Culture in 2029? You know, what is your event strategy? How are you going to use these big, beautiful, exciting places in the near future? You know, the assets are there. I mean, it is a wonderful place. And I say genuinely, it's one of my favorite cities. And we've worked all over Britain and Ireland. And I think it's, you know, so many elements of kind of relevance in where we are now. You know, people are leaving London, you know, they're like driving out in hordes, you know, you're almost seeing the coaches empty out. But this is a place which is an exemplar in terms of city centre, live, work. It's all there, but live, work, entertain. You know, the way city centres need to move forward, Gloucester is already very high up the step in this, and its opportunity to tip that much further is absolutely wonderful. So the visual language needs to support, but it also needs to sort of jiggle that and say, it is animating it, it is doing it. There are events, there are things that are potentially happening. But fundamentally, it simply has to help illustrate and bring to life the unexpected, the urban unexpected. It needs to unite the dock area, the other areas, the cathedral areas, the countryside areas, the canals. It needs to bring all those things, but it also needs to animate it. Take some of those assets, those historical assets, but create something that feels animated, that feels like an event in itself. So I also create a set of words called creative strategic direction words. And these are words that would influence the commissioning of new slogans, the commissioning of new photography, just thinking about bridge to strategy and thinking about, so if we were making something, first and foremost, it would have to be celebratory. We're looking forward, you know, we want to get that city vibe, but we also want to be not afraid for it to be a little bit unexpected, a little bit intriguing. You know, there is a digital story and that story will grow. There's also an industrial story, and that industrial story is cool. We have industrial living in a town, in a city centre. But also, you know, there's lots of, you know, there's lots of grey, there's lots of mutedness, there's lots of old industrial. The visual language can help with that animation process. It can help bring colour and animation into the city centre. It can be a little bit more daring. So the other thing that it needs to do is be flexible. So your visual language can be used and highlight different things. It can talk about how the dots connect with the city centre. It can celebrate the countryside and the canals, and it can put together all these elements, both industrial and rural and city centre, to give you something that you can bend and twist, turn up, turn down, depending on what you're communicating. So it's fundamentally a flexible tool. You know, in some occasions, you might use some of it to highlight some of your storytelling, albeit industrial made modern, or it may be about celebrating your historical assets, which are actually modern because they have visitors every week as it stands. So the most important thing is that it's not just one thing and that you have the control of that. So again, it can be used on its own, or it can be used to supplement photography to give that modern animation. And there are many ways of doing that. You know, again, where it's relevant, you can even be more daring in how you treat your photography to make that urban unexpected a little bit cooler. You know, and that's perhaps when you're communicating to a younger university audience. So your visual language is effectively, like the photography, simply another tool. And that tool is a very celebratory one of the place and what it has to offer. And simply another thing to use in terms of your communications. So here you can see it being used by some of your partner brands. And at a first glance, you think, well, where is it? I don't know where it is. And the reason being is because it's not about competing with you, the stakeholders. It's about adding something. So it's just a little bit of white in the top right-hand corner. That might take you to an area that celebrates the wider assets of the place. There's lots of things it can do. And again, here, you know, slightly more overtly used, but it's not interfering with the stakeholders' brand, their typography, any of their messages. It's simply helping to connect them to the place and the place's assets. So put it in a corner, put it in the corner of some typography, suddenly that photography modernizes simply with its relationship with the graphic language applied. And that sometimes in itself is incredibly helpful. You do have a logo mark, and there's a time and a place where you'll need that. And it does its job in terms of animating and celebrating some of those unique points. You have a typeface as well, and a set of other things. So we're here really today. So you as the stakeholders are thinking about how we bring these themes and this big idea to life. How can we collaborate? How can we cross over? We've got a bunch of assets. How do we use them? Where can we use them? So, you know, straight away, you have to think our place story, which has come from all this search, is currently what our point of difference is. But really, how do we now take our point of difference and go, what should our environment look like? What should our signage look like? How can we communicate our point of difference. So it's different from every other city, different from every other town. It's different from the Cotswolds. How do we put it out there? How do we change our environment to do this? How do we change our behavior? Who should we be talking to? Who should we be collaborating with? You know, communications are a much easier thing to think of. You know, what slogans and thoughts and catchphrases can be born out of this engine? Hundreds of them. You know, you've got years worth of things to play with. And then what sort of products? You know, what are our current and future products? You know, how can we make our place, your stage, come to life? You know, are there festivals we haven't thought about? You know, are there ways that we can reanimate our history and make it current and relevant to today? All those things really should be coming out of the thinking that makes you different. So who can tell that story? It's first and foremost, very simply, this is an example where we brought it to schools and we said to a bunch of school children, how many of you, when you leave school, intend to stay here in the city you were born and get a job? Probably 90% of them didn't put their hand up. Maybe 10% said they might stay. Others said, well, we want to go to more interesting places. We want to go to bigger cities. We simply did an exercise with them where we showed them the photography of their place, the assets of their place, the types of things that were going on with their place, and asked the same question at the end of the workshop. It was the polar opposite. 90% of them said, actually, now that we know that, we're probably going to stay here. We might set up our own businesses here. There seems to be lots going on. And it's shocking, I think, to us as place specialists to realize how often people don't know their own place, don't know the assets of their own place because they're wrapped up in their own little world. So, and there's playful ways of doing that. This is a show with TV show with Channel 4, which was talking about changing a small town. And here we took the words of the place and simply plastered it around the town. Channel 4 came back, filmed people with their words reacting to their engagement with their town. So it didn't cost much, it's just photocopies and bits of paper. There's other ways of doing it as well. You will have photography, you will have a visual language, you've got the ingredients for message making. Again, very small place, New Haven, they wanted to bring a bit of pride to their professional community. So some of those assets that they were celebrating based on their strategy, we simply used the photographs, which didn't cost anything in this case, used the visual language, which again, didn't cost anything, used the typography, which didn't cost anything. One of the local stakeholders said, no one's using my advertising space in the bus stops, have it for free. Everybody connected, everybody benefited it. Perhaps there's going to be some benefits for the place. Certainly there is from a local pride point of view, but also there's many people who are driving along here on their way to Brighton. They might think, I didn't realize these cool things were going on here. I might relocate my business here. I might bring my opportunities here by this simple, cost-effective exercise. Coventry, you know, we're talking about, you know, this is bigger stakes now. And they have a lot more to shout about it. They have big industry. So those people from that big industry play a really important part of their future. And by them getting together, that in itself is a massive thing for any city in terms of how it lobbies government, how it creates more opportunity, how it brings money in and opportunity for the city. So in this case, Jaguar Land Rover, they're hosting the first event, you know, and you can see, you know, they didn't do it lightly. You know, they invested in their place because of course they know it's in their interest to celebrate where they're located. Of course it is. And this room full of people, you know, are part of those people who make change. Arguably, you can say the beginning of this process And these people coming together certainly wasn't a disadvantage, the different things that happened to them in their future. So one of the things was they decided, let's look for more investment for our city. Well, where can we get some extra money from? You know what? Let's go to London and let's speak to some of those big investors. And let's say to them, why don't you bring your money to our city? So they hosted an event in the Shard. And that event was incredibly successful in terms of bringing opportunity for the city. And again, one of the other things is one of their other themes was about peace and reconciliation. So going back to what I was saying earlier about products, they were, well, how can we bring this theme to life? Well, why don't we do a big peace and reconciliation event? So they created Rising, which is a global peace forum, puts the city on the map in a global state, on the global stage. So there are ways of simply you guys sitting together with the strength and the influence that you all have and say, how do we make our point of difference come to life? One of the other quite small things was in one of these champions meeting, one of the stakeholders, very much into his cars, Coventry has a ring road that goes all the way around it. You had somebody else that was there from the council who could connect, and he simply said, why don't we use this negative thing, which is our ring road, and have a vintage car event? You know, this vintage car event again is something that the community benefits from, but also with Coventry's history of car making and car innovation, it's also an opportunity. You know, they are leading the world in self-drive cars. So you can create an event that does more than what it simply seems. And by having the right people in the room, that event can happen. Of course, there are other things. There are things where when you all get together and you all have that little bit of pride, you can get a big chunk of financial opportunity thrown at you from the government because you've got a story and a point of difference that you can flex and tell. So again, just showing you some of these applications and how they can work. This is just another example, a more rural example, South Downs National Park. We were very lucky to win Best World Place Brand for this project. But it's more about showing you how you can use things and where you can use things. So in terms of what it was trying to do, it was over 200 square miles of geography that had many different local authorities and many different political allegiances. So it had to unite a very complicated bit of land. So its visual language effectively not only did that, but capitalizing on its rolling hills, but it connected how the land, the topology, the geology affected the nature, and therefore affected the wildlife, affected the literature, affected the architecture. So all these things were connected. But again, once you've got a bunch of photography, once you've got a visual language, you can apply it in multiple places. But it's not just about sticking on a visual language, it's about thinking it through. So something that was very important to them was signage, because that notion of having sculptural signage identified this very complicated piece of geography. But that became also one of their positive stories. So they used sustainable wood from the national park. So they used the materials from the place to make a sustainable story. So they followed through on their strategy in bringing things to life. But also in terms of their visual language, some existing things could simply be modified with their new visual language elements to effectively make it feel more unique, you know, and there's lots of examples of that, you know. They could also connect with other partners, like you can see here, the national park. So, but not only that, you know, some of the key stakeholders even added it to some of their products. So you can see here on a local beer, they're telling the story of the national park next to their product. but also it's about behavior. So here you can see this is about a message of 100% electric. This is behaving like a national park. This is about being ineffectively green and celebrating those assets. And of course, lots of places you can use this stuff. Again, another advertising example, very low cost, but the message here, very, very different, was about telling people to have a fresh perspective, stop using their cars and get on the bus. You know, so it's a simple thing, but it's a human behavior in terms of connecting with the uniqueness of the national park. When it came to things like their website, because it was important to connect 200 square miles of geography, quite simply, when we did a workshop with them, we simply reminded them that's what they should do. They shouldn't put their widgets first, their weather first. They should do what the strategy suggests they should do, and they should demonstrate that. So the first thing that arrives is it's connecting all those different assets, because they are illustrating and bringing to life their themes and their big idea. Again, the list of assets just keeps moving. So working with someone like the National Trust is often, you know, they have their own ways, they have their own colors. Nobody has a bend. Give them a visual language, give them assets. They're very happy to collaborate and to share branding, which you can see here, not only on the signage, but actually used very strongly within their City Mill experience. So the language moves forward as the place moves forward. So when they were granted dark sky status, they could carry on developing their visual language, bringing in these new stories and these new assets. So when I think about ambition, ambition isn't about the scale of the place. It's about people who are willing and passionate to get together and do something. North Notts is a very small rural place, not so big in terms of population. In fact, its countryside space is one of its points of difference. So celebrating that space within its design is incredibly important, because that was its story. Thinking about how it could do things in terms of it as some of its market towns, unique bunting rather than just standard old bunting. You know, they also, the stakeholders got together and went, you know what, we're going to go to our local airport and we're going to actually, again, celebrate what makes us special. And who knows where the opportunities can come from something like that. But we're also going to think more imaginatively, rather than just having benches that are the same as everybody else's benches. Why don't we start to try and bring our stories to life, our points of difference to life? And also, we have a strong pride and a strong set of community groups which fundamentally come together and do things like tend to flowers and other things. So why don't we bring the countryside into our town centres and manage that ourselves? So these benches were born of that. But not only that, if we think about practical things like finger posts, you know, we've got the Robin Hood story, but we need to look forward. So why don't we look forward with a modern take on the Robin Hood story? So when someone comes to our town, they go, well, this is very fresh engineering, but they also go, oh, I can see there's arrows shot through the tree. Why is that? Oh, Robin Hood, that's incredible. So effectively, you're taking your history and you're bringing it forward. Within this area, there's more than one town. So it's very important that each town has its own identity or its own set of colours. And sometimes simply not using grey is a massive step forward for a place. So you can see in Retford, they have their own colour, whereas Worksop, who are also part of North Notts and part of the same colour palette, have a different colour that they use. So when they effectively have got their new bus station, they do it in their colour. But also they can bring to life some of their old assets, but they're refreshing them in a way that's unique, not just the same as everybody else. So even boring things like parking. You know, why does parking have to be boring? You have the ability in many places to simply add detail that makes people feel a little bit like they're somewhere different. And again, in terms of local stories, it's as ambitious as you are as a place. So with Retford, they had a very strong historical society. And this historical society was very disappointed, is a diplomatic way of saying, with their own train station, because they felt when you went past, it didn't show off how special the place was to it. It felt like any old train station. So they went to Virgin and they said to Virgin, we don't have any money, but we've got all these assets. We've got stuff that we can use. Can you help us? And Virgin Trains said, well, yeah, we want our train stations to look better and we're happy for them to be unique. We'll pay for, as you can see the examples here, unique messages on benches, on posters. We'll help you update this dark and dingy corridor with positive messages and place celebration. So this was paid for by different local stakeholders who cared about their place and who benefited from it themselves. The local council in this case wanted to be reminded of those themes. So in each of their meeting rooms, they dedicated it to one of the themes. So one of the meeting rooms purely was talking about connectivity. So they might have been talking about something else, but at the end of the meeting, they might have gone, well, what are we doing about making our connectivity better? So again, simple things that can be very powerful in changing behavior. But they went further to that. They're only a little place, but they all got together and they realized we've got lots of really big stories, but we don't actually tell them. So they created this modern asset, which was a pilgrim's museum, and then a pilgrim's trail that effectively probably helped some of the local shops and assets by connecting them to some of their big stories. So making what was a very old story a very modern experience. But not just that, their ruralness is something they're still pushing and prodding. They're like, well, you know, why can't we celebrate our ruralness in the same way the North has the Angel of the North? Why can't we have, rather than a traditional signpost, a big rural sculptural signpost? And of course, with that ambition, you get results. You know, these are the first rural bid in Britain to effectively win a business bid. So again, a lot of government money and support because the local stakeholders were passionate about their place, and in the little ways they could, they got together and they did something. So going back to Gloucester, you know, you have a toolkit at the minute. What does that toolkit do? I mean, primarily that toolkit will help people who are commissioning work, thinking about work, in terms of reminding you very succinctly of your themes, of your big idea, of the creative strategic direction, and in effect, introducing the visual expression. And as your assets increase, talking about those two, talking about photography, how you should take photography moving forward, what you should take photography of, who should be in it, and showing some of the assets in terms of where you're up to with this point. Again, it's very practical. It's very straightforward. Everyone can have a copy of this. So it will introduce and talk about the visual language, how it can be used, the dexterity of it, what elements to focus in on, when to use it strongly, when in a way it's there like a quiet watermark that sits in the background. Also, how your identities work, you know, simple things that go with that, your color palette. And going back to what I was saying about North Knots, you know, there's always space for color that's relevant for an event. You know, colors you use for Christmas are going to be very different from the colors they use for the summer. you'll always be allowed that flexibility. But also where you can stick to a color palette will help give you consistency with your expression. Your typeface and where to use that typeface, whether it be in headings, subheadings, body fonts. And as I say, in many of the cases, these are technical tools that will probably be used by your designers. But in other cases, they're certainly worth looking at in terms of the thinking process, you know, which brings us back to, again, why we're here today. You know, we're here really for you all to think, how can you all collaborate together? How do you get together to effectively help bring to life Gloucester, and how Gloucester is something we should experience and embrace its urban unexpected? What ways can that happen? What assets do we have now that we can bend? What opportunities exist today that can be effectively worked with, and to use these extra tools that you have? You know, how do we harness and animate our history? Where are opportunities in doing this? You know, where can we use what, and what stakeholders can do what, and what stakeholders should speak to what other stakeholders to make that what happen? Similarly, with Our Place, Your Stage, massive opportunity, multiple spaces, and it's where does that start? So with that,
okay, thanks, Peter. So hopefully you'll have seen through that and heard that this is very much not just about marketing, it's about the place doing things differently. The last part of this session, we wanted it to be interactive, so you've got a chance to ask myself, Peter, or Rebecca any questions that you want through the Q&A facility. So anything that you've seen, any queries you've got, whether that's about the visual language, the toolkit, the approach, some of the examples that we've shown. But as I said, the key bit to making this work is that if everybody sits back and thinks, well, we'll wait for the council to do all the stuff, or partners like that, then you'll be waiting forever, not because the council can't do it, they certainly cannot do it all. They're not the whole place. So this requires everybody kind of to get stuck in and to do their bit. And hopefully the approach that we've shown you will encourage you that you can do that, because that's why we wanted to show what other places have done and are achieving now. So as I say, any questions, chuck them on the Q&A. Whilst you've got us all here, we'll do our level best to answer them. Rebecca.
Hi, John. Yeah, I'm going to start off with a question for Peter. Thank you for showing us so many examples, Peter. What would be helpful for me is a practical guide of how to do things like apply the watermarks and, you know, where they should go. A bit more of a kind of, yeah, like a practical guide of how to use the different elements. Is that woven into the toolkit?
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Is.
And you have to understand as well, you know, how you might put a watermark in on a banner will be very different to how you put it in on a business card, to very different to how you put it in. So, you know, it will give you guidance on how to do that, but there will always be specific needs.
And I guess it's, you know, it's flexible as well. So, you know, it's one of those things that's difficult for people to get wrong. So if, of course, if anybody wants any guidance on anything, if you want me to look at anything and check anything, please just send it over. And if I'm not sure, I'll send it to Peter and John to check as well. So yeah, it's one of those things that if people have the confidence to start using it, start using the font, starts using the watermarks, please do feel like you can. We are going to put all of the toolkit and this recording onto the Visit Gloucester website for people to download. So after this session, I will be sending around a link with where you can find those elements as well. And then if people do want access to the kind of visual identity assets, so things like the watermarks, the fonts, the color palette, that kind of thing, they can email me and I will send that over to them.
So a couple of questions. Let's deal with these. So first one, Rebecca, I think for you really, is there a date when people can start using this?
So we are looking to launch the brand in a kind of a launch celebratory event. However, what I would say is that myself and my team have already started using elements of the brand. We've used it on logos for our venue site, so you can see it in action on the Meet Gloucester website. We've also started using it for our presentations. So John and Peter, do correct me if you think I'm wrong, but actually I think if people want to start using it now, I'd be really happy with that. Especially using the narrative and the Gloucester story, which again is on our website already for people to take a look at. If you want to start using the narrative and weaving that into your content, I would be really happy with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a softly approach to this is absolutely the right way. So I think using it is from now is not an issue at all. Peter, question, will the assets be available in a format to use the different elements separately, so we can take certain elements to use individually?
The language will be given to you in multiple formats, but I don't think it should be stripped out and made into a new language. So the elements are together, and they're together for a reason.
But some of the watermarks are stripped out though, aren't they?
Yeah, well, it's effectively all overlaid together, and it will be in the various formats that are needed for the various types of prints. But, you know, we wouldn't want to pull out in any individual icons or marks from it, because the point is the city's made up of multiple assets.
Yeah. I guess for you, Rebecca, it'd be great to see some merchandise. We'd love to have something like that available in the National Waterways Museum shop. Are there any plans to produce anything?
It would be very costly for us to produce merchandise on behalf of our partners. However, we would probably look to license you guys to use the branding on merchandise if you so wished. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, probably another one for you. Will there be a central matching place where we can offer spaces for events, e.g. our community garden at the Heritage Hub?
Your best bet to kind of feed into the space strategy and for events is to talk to our events team. You can reach them on city events, or events all one word, at gloucester.gov.uk.
Cool. Peter, question about fonts. Will each business be given a license to download them? We've got our own fonts as part of our branding, but will the toolkit advise on when to use these new ones?
I mean, again, just in terms of when to use them, it's when place comes first rather than any individual organization comes first, or any individual event comes first, because that would have its own typeface. You know, so there's a time and a place for using the font. And in terms of those licenses, there will be, those licenses will be available, I think. Am I right, Rebecca?
We can put I'm sure we can find a way to license the fonts. We can show them and share them.
Okay, we're about to start a branding exercise for City Voices, for History Festival, so it would make sense to liaise on this. Are you the point of contact, Rebecca?
I am the point of contact. Please do get in touch with me. I'd love to work with you on this.
Cool. Somebody's asked a question about the process that we went through to get to all of this. I think that the key bit with it was a fairly intense piece of engagement. We worked with the city to understand who were the critical people that we should be talking with and listening to. So there was a huge amount of that. And I think it was very consistent what people had to say. Didn't matter where they were from or how old they were or whatever. They pretty much thought the same about the opportunities for the place going forward. There was a steering group from the place which oversaw the work. that was representing the place. So they signed off the story, they signed off the visuals. So it's been a very place-led, place-based process, which has really been driven by the stakeholders, which is the way it should be.
Probably important to mention that we also engaged with over 1,000 people on the consultation part of the place branding project.
Peter, in Gloucester, we have the very attractive Cathedral Quarter place brand. How would the Gloucester branding sit alongside it?
Well, the cathedral is one of the assets of the city, as are the quays are another asset. You know, they all have their individual branding, and that's really important because that's their individual stories. This is something that sits above all that and unites that and helps to animate all those individual brands.
And that's where the watermark version comes in.
Absolutely.
So you wouldn't use, and we wouldn't expect anybody to be using the full-on version next to their brand because it would be noisy against it. But the subtlety that Peter showed in terms of partner usage of just that whiteout version, I think that's the sort of thing that you would look to use, where it's just making sure that the asset is linked to the place, and if that's all it's saying, that's fine. Another one about how will we know if this approach has worked? That's always a very good question. I think with all of this, and I think, and Rebecca can no doubt coming on the back of it, but in terms of thinking about this and places, the key bit about a place brand is it is not a silver bullet to answer all questions. It's about creating an environment for success. So it is creating the environment for organisations and approaches to be more successful. So if we go back to, say, Coventry winning City of Culture, it didn't directly win City of Culture because of all the place brand work, but the place brand work gave it the story, it gave it the leadership group, it gave it the champions who were all up and buzzing, and through the social media connections that were created for the place were then used in terms of support of the bid for City of Culture. So that's probably a good example of showing you that this is environment for success. So I don't think it's as simple as going A plus B equals C. You can't say, right, we're going to do a place brand, therefore increasing with investment by 100 million in the next 2 years. That isn't going to happen. Or we're going to attract X% more visitors. But you've got a lot more chance if the place has got a very clear narrative and a clear approach in terms of what it's saying, and that all of the stakeholders are saying pretty much the same thing. That helps considerably.
I think for me, it's about it's about organisations being more collaborative, but also organisations kind of talking about the city in a really positive way. You know, it was never the visitors to Gloucester that talked about Gloucester in a negative way. It was always kind of inside the city, and actually embodying those confident behaviours, behaving like a city, talking about the city in positive terms and being proud of what we've got. I think that for me is when we'll know we've been successful.
What are the plans for bringing the brand to life? Are there any projects, Rebecca, that you can talk about?
Absolutely. So there's, you know, we have a launch that we're planning for probably the back end of April, which you will all be invited to. We're also doing some really kind of cool and exciting things with the brand as well, including we've commissioned some giant letters that spell out Gloucester, which we're going to wrap in the branding, which we will roll out for events. We're looking at using the brand to vinyl and empty shop windows. We're looking at weaving the brand into the City Council's offices as well. I'm having discussions about that. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that we're going to try and activate and use the brand going forward. But obviously it's not just down to myself and my team, it's now down to all of you guys as well to start using it and bringing it to life.
Okay, next one. Will there be seasonal photo shoots for new marketing imagery this year?
Absolutely. So actually we're working with Thinking Place on a photography session, which we're hoping to do in March. So I'll be approaching you guys to see if we can come and take photos in your venues. Then we do have a kind of an ongoing photography project that we're working with the University of Gloucestershire with on, and we're using their photography students. So again, if you do want some photography of your venues, please do get in touch with us, because it is something we could probably support you in.
Okay, keep those questions coming. What else have I got here? Peter, what's your favourite place brand that you've worked on, and why?
Great question. Great question. I mean, I still enjoy South Downs National Park. We're still working with them. I've just done the Seven Sisters with them, and a unique sort of signage system that takes what happened with the South Downs somewhere else. But I like the sustainable stories. I felt incredibly proud last year with the project we did in Zambia, in terms of actually being able to bend money to give to opportunities to people in the community who otherwise wouldn't have got it, to create a national asset. So for me, I get incredibly excited, not about what happens further down the line, you know, and those examples, you know, again, incredibly proud of the box park, New Haven, just put up this year. That wouldn't have happened without the process. I think with Thinking Place, we've got 4 cities of culture now. So I feel like I'm starting to brag, so I'll stop.
Rebecca's one here. Not sure if this has been covered, but did you say the assets can be downloaded from the Visit Gloucester website?
Yeah, absolutely. I will send you all a link to where you can find these as soon as we're off this meeting.
Okay. Right. I'm just conscious of everybody's time, and we're still within schedule. I can't see any more new questions, but obviously you've had the chance to ask Rebecca anything after this separately, and if that needs our involvement, we're here and happy to help. So I'll just let Rebecca perhaps wrap up the session.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's wonderful to see so many people on the call. If you do have any questions, you can always email me. Hopefully most of you have got my email, but if not, I'll type it in the chat shortly. And a big thanks to Thinking Place for running through some really interesting examples of using place branding in different places. So I'm going to sign off now. Lovely to see you all. Take care.